Ohio just approved $1 million in emergency funding for 16 children. Not because of a natural disaster, not because of a school shooting, because a single family in the state's smallest county managed to hide 16 kids inside a 12 by 12-foot room for what investigators believe was years. And when those children were finally discovered, the system meant to protect them nearly collapsed under the weight of trying to help them all at once. The Ohio Controlling Board signed off on the money this week with no objections, and the state's Department of Children and Youth called what's happening in Vinton County an unprecedented child welfare crisis, a county agency that literally saw its caseload double overnight when it took in these children.
In this report, we're going to walk through one of the most heartbreaking, just absolutely horrific discoveries in Ohio's history. What authorities found inside a seemingly ordinary home in Vinton County was literally beyond anyone's worst nightmare. Today, we're going to examine the shocking new details of what's now being called the Ohio House of Horrors. We'll look at the massive systemic failure that allowed it to happen and the government's unprecedented move to approve a $1 million emergency fund for the survivors.
16. I really want you to just sit with that number for a second. 16 children. Not one, not two, but 16 human beings ranging in age from just 6 years old all the way up to 26 were found completely captive. They were kept totally hidden from the eyes of the world, completely isolated and enduring unimaginable suffering right under the noses of their community.
So let's dive into the actual discovery. It was the morning of June 30th, 2026. The Vinton County Sheriff's Office and Child Services showed up at the home responding to what they honestly thought was just a standard domestic violence complaint. But when they opened the doors, they found a 12 by 12-foot room. Inside were 16 large stick beds, all crammed together. The room was engulfed in absolute darkness. It was crawling with bugs and covered in human waste. And here's the hardest part to stomach. These victims didn't just sleep there. They lived there. They ate their meals in this filth. For them, this tiny, horrific room was literally their entire world.
Section 1. Captives and Captors. Let's shift our focus to the individuals inside this house. Because to truly understand how this house functioned, we really need to look at the people inside it. The lines between who was a victim and who was forced to be a captor are incredibly complex and just deeply tragic. You have the homeowners, 52-year-old father Gary Sider Sr. and his 39-year-old wife Christina. Also living in the home was the 50-year-old grandmother, Elizabeth Siders. But here is where it gets truly heartbreaking, guys. The two oldest children, 26-year-old Gary Jr. and 28-year-old Elizabeth, were captives themselves. Yet they were actually forced by the adults to act as caretakers for the younger kids who range from 6 to 12 years old. In fact, the 28-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, had been forced into a motherly role for the last 10 years of her life. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that these older siblings were victims trapped in a prison, manipulated into maintaining that exact same prison for their younger siblings.
Section 2. 18 Years in Darkness.
Now, the conditions they lived in were obviously horrific, but what makes this case nearly impossible to comprehend is the sheer amount of time they spent in this darkness. The family moved to Vinton County in 2008, and for 18 years, the isolation was absolute. For nearly 2 decades, there was 0 school attendance records. None of these children were ever sent to school. There was not a single health checkup, not one single visit to a doctor. But the most devastating point in this entire timeline, that's 2024. 2 years before they were finally rescued, Child Services actually conducted a prior visit to this exact home, and somehow that intervention completely failed. The system totally missed it, and these kids were left in the dark for another 2 whole years until that fateful domestic violence call in June 2026.
Section 3. Rescue and Legal Action. But listen, once the authorities finally saw what was happening behind those closed doors, the response was explosive. The very moment the victims were discovered, a massive 24-hour extraction operation was launched. Medical teams and rescue workers were literally working around the clock from June 30th into July 1st just to pull these kids out of that toxic environment. By July 4th, all 16 victims, that's 15 males and 1 female, were successfully relocated to 2 separate hospitals. And immediately, they started getting everything they'd been denied for 18 years. We're talking thorough health checkups, decades of delayed vaccinations, the very beginnings of an education, and intensive psychological therapy. It was late, incredibly late for sure, but the mobilization was finally happening.
And right as the medical teams were working to save the victims, the legal system slammed into high gear. For 15 consecutive days, from July 1st all the way to July 15th, there were non-stop court hearings. Accountability was swift. Charges were officially filed against the father, Gary Siders Sr., the mother, Christina Siders, and the grandmother, Elizabeth Siders. Tragically, because of his forced role as a caretaker, charges were also filed against the 26-year-old son, Gary Jr. The justice system absolutely did not waste a single second to secure these indictments.
Section 4. The $1 million fund. Let's talk about what happens next for the survivors. With the perpetrators finally facing justice and the victims safe in hospitals, a really critical question remained. How do you even begin to rebuild the lives of 16 people who have literally never known the outside world? Well, the answer began with a monumental government decision. On July 15, 2026, the court approved an unprecedented emergency fund of $1 million. And to be clear, this funding is strictly and entirely allocated for the victims. It's designed to cover their long-term health care, their ongoing intensive therapy, and their education. It is a massive, systemic financial commitment from the government to try and give these 16 survivors the tools they desperately need to navigate a world they are seeing for the very first time.
So, while the emergency funds and the rapid rescue definitely offer a glimmer of hope for their future, we are left staring at a deeply, deeply unsettling question. How could a system complete with neighbors, schools, and child services completely overlook 16 children for 18 long years, especially after authorities stood right at their doorstep in 2024? It's a failure that absolutely demands answers. If you found this analysis helpful, please subscribe, like, and share. And if you have thoughts on how a tragedy exactly like this can be prevented in the future, or if there's another story you want us to explain, drop a comment below. Keep seeking the truth, and we'll see you next time.